Good morning all. We are starting with our new academic year today. So I am Ritu. I'll be taking biology for you this year. Before starting with the classes, we will see which are the chapters we have to study in biology this year. So in biology, we have to study 6 chapters. First chapter is chapter 5, the fundamental unit of life. Chapter 6, tissues. Chapter 7, diversity in living organism. Chapter 13, why do we fall in? Chapter 14, natural resources, and chapter 15, improvement in fruit resources. So out of 15 chapters, we have 6 chapters to study in biology. So today we will be starting with the first chapter, that is chapter 5, the fundamental unit of life. So now we will be starting with the chapter 5, the fundamental unit of life. So before starting with the chapter, you have to get ready with your notebook and the textbook. If you have the textbook with you, you can take the textbook and also get ready with the notebook. The first chapter which we have to study is chapter 5, fundamental unit of life. You would have studied in grade 8th standard about the cell, which is the fundamental unit of life. We know the fundamental unit of life is cell. Cell forms the fundamental unit of life. And you have studied the definition of cell in 8th class. That is, cell is the basic structural and functional unit of an organism. Cell forms the basic structural and functional unit of an organism. Now, who discovered the cell? Cell is discovered by scientist Robert Hooke. Actually, who was Robert Hooke? He was a mathematician and a physicist, joined as curator of instruments in Royal Society of London, and there, while doing experiments with the instruments, he designed a simple microscope of his own, and then with the help of that simple microscope, he observed the cork, that is from the bark of a tree. Cork of a tree, he observed it under his simple microscope. And what did he observe? He observed simple honeycomb-like structures. When he observed cork from the tree under his simple microscope, he observed single honeycomb-like structures in the microscope. And he felt it like little compartments, and these compartments in Latin, actually these compartments are called as cellulae. So with that, he termed it as cell. So what he observed under the microscope, he termed it as cell, and he identified it as the basic structural unit of an organism, and the cell forms the basic structural unit of an organism. So Robert Hooke in 1665 observed the cell and termed the cell, and later what happened, he published his findings in a book called as Micrographia. In the book Micrographia, he recorded his findings. That's about the discovery of cell. When we deal with the history of cell, we studied cell is discovered by the scientist Robert Hooke. Now, he discovered the cell which was not living. It was not living. But another scientist, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, he discovered the first living cells in water. When he observed the pond waters, he observed the first living cell. The first living cell was observed by Anton van Leeuwenhoek. And when we go through the history of cell, the nucleus of the cell is discovered by another scientist, Robert Brown, and Purkinje is the scientist who coined the term protoplasm. So these are about some of the things which we have to study from the history of the cell. Now, next important thing which we have to study is about the cell theory. Cell theory is a theory which is proposed by two scientists, Schwann and Slater. Now we will study about cell theory. Cell theory is proposed by two scientists, Schleiden and Schwann. And the cell theory states that all plants and animals are composed of cells. Actually, Schleiden and Schwann discovered all plants are composed of cells and all animals are composed of cells. And the cell is the basic unit of life. The cell theory states that all plants and animals are composed of cell and cell is the basic unit of life. And later, another scientist, Rudolf Virchow, expanded the cell theory by adding the statement, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. That is, each and every cell will form from the pre-existing cells. So the cell theory now have three statements. All plants and animals are composed of cell. The cell is the basic unit of life and all cells arise from pre-existing cells. And this is proposed by three scientists, Schleiden, Schwann and Virchow. Now we'll see the definition for cell. Cell is the basic structural and functional unit of life and all organisms are made up of cell. We know the cell shape and size of cells are related to the specific function they perform. Actually, the cells will have different shape and different size. We know some of the cells will be very small like mycoplasma, but the largest cell that is ostrich egg of ostrich, that much big it will be. So the size of the cells varies from very minute mycoplasma to the largest ostrich egg. And the shape of the cell also varies. There are different shapes. Each and every cell will have different shapes according to the function what they do. Which function they are doing, according to that the shape of the cell varies. Now we can see the various cells from human body itself. Each and every cell will be having different shapes, not same. There the shape is not same. They have different shapes. Nerve cell is the longest cell in human body. Ovum is the largest cell in human body. Sperm cell is smallest. And we can see there are cells with different shapes. Now we can see the classification of organism based on the number of cells present in them. They are actually unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. So the organisms are classified into two based on the number of cells present. That is unicellular organisms and multicellular organism. Unicellular organisms have single cell and multicellular organisms have many cells present in it. In unicellular organism, single cell will perform all the body activities. All the life processes is done by the single cell itself in case of unicellular. But multicellular organism, they have many cells arranged to form tissues and organs and organ systems which can perform different functions. Now we can see the components, the basic components of cell. There are three main basic components of cell. They are cell membrane, cytoplasm and the nucleus. And we will be studying about these three basic components in detail in this chapter. So we studied about the basic components of cell. Three basic components of cell are plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. This you have already studied in 8th class. Basic components of cell include plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. First, we will start with the first component, that is plasma membrane. So we know plasma membrane forms the outermost covering of the cell. All these notes you have to write down in your notebook. Okay, plasma membrane forms the outermost covering of the cell. And now we see the main functions of plasma membrane. Main functions of plasma membrane include it separates the cell from external environment. It helps to separate the contents of the cell from the external environment. Then it allows or permits the entry or exit. Of materials in and out of the cell. So it helps in the movement of materials in and out of the cell. And the next function is it prevents the entry of unwanted materials. Some of the materials it prevents or checks the entry of unwanted materials. And hence, since it prevents the entry of some materials and allows only some materials to pass through, it is called as selectively permeable membrane or semi-permeable membrane. A plasma membrane is a selectively permeable membrane or a semi-permeable membrane. So what is plasma membrane? We'll just see once again. Plasma membrane forms the outermost covering of all the cells. Both plant cells and animal cells have the plasma membrane. Now we see the functions of plasma membrane. The first function is it helps to separate the contents of the cell from the external environment. Second is it allows or permits entry and exit of some materials in and out of the cell, and it prevents the entry of some materials, and hence it is called as selectively permeable or semi-permeable membrane. So these are the main functions of plasma membrane. Now we have to see how the movement of materials take place through the plasma membrane. How the entry and exit of materials take place through the plasma membrane, we have to study now. We'll see how the movement of substances take place through plasma membrane. How does the materials or the substances move through the plasma membrane? And actually the movement of substances through the plasma membrane take place by two main processes. One is diffusion, the other one is osmosis. I think have you studied about diffusion and osmosis in any class? Diffusion means it's actually the movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Diffusion means the movement of materials or the molecules or movement of substances from a region of higher concentration. Where it is higher, from there it will move to the region of lower concentration. For example, we will see a very simple example for this. That is, consider two benches. Okay. In one bench, 5 of you are sitting, and here in this bench only 3 are sitting. So what naturally you will do, from this higher region, from where the number is high, one of the student will move to this. So that is the same thing happen with the diffusion. From a region of higher concentration, it will have the molecule substances will have a tendency to move towards the region of lower concentration. That is actually diffusion. So diffusion means the spontaneous movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Now we see an example for diffusion. Okay, this is just a glass of water, not half glass of water. I'm going to put. I know you may be knowing about this. This you know. What is this? So I'll add just one drop of coloring ujala to this. See, you can see the color change. The concentration, where the concentration from here, what happens? The molecules of ujala will spread in the water, and entire water will be homogenized. It will be of same color. You can see the spreading of particles will take place in the water. So now the concentration is high, where down. From there it will have a tendency to spread throughout the water, and the entire water will be having the same color. You can see the change in the color. So this spreading, from where the concentration is high, the materials will have a tendency to spread to the region where the concentration is low. You can see the changes in the color. It's spreading. The molecule is actually spreading. Now the entire water is having same color. So this is an example for diffusion. So diffusion means the spontaneous movement of substances from a region of higher concentration to a region of the lower concentration. So when we consider the plasma membrane, the gases, or when we consider cell, gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen move across the cell membrane or the plasma membrane by the process of diffusion. The gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen move across the cell membrane by the process of diffusion. So it has a tendency, the gases will have a tendency that from where the concentration is higher, the gases will move to the region where the concentration is low. You can see it. Now the entire water is having the same color. This is by the process of diffusion. This is what happens when when we burn incense sticks or the agarbattis. When we burn the agarbattis, when we are keeping agarbatti in one corner of the room, but the smell of the agarbatti will spread throughout the room. That is by the process of diffusion. So diffusion helps in the spreading of particles or the spontaneous movement from a region of, don't forget to use this statement, that is from a region of higher concentration to a region of its lower concentration. So that is diffusion. Now we see how the gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen move across the cell membrane. Now we will see how the movement of carbon dioxide and oxygen take place through the plasma membrane by the process of diffusion. What leads to the diffusion here? So here, when we consider a cell, what happens? The respiration is the process which takes place inside the cell. That cellular respiration. Cell respiration is actually the breaking down of glucose molecules by the help of oxygen to release the energy, and the byproduct is the waste product which is formed after respiration process that we will be studying in detail in higher grades in 10th grade. So after respiration, the waste product, after respiration, which is the waste product formed? Carbon dioxide, and this carbon dioxide is formed within the cell. So more the cellular waste is carbon dioxide that is formed after respiration inside the cell. More carbon dioxide will be formed inside the cell when compared to the external environment. So what is the tendency? This carbon dioxide will have a tendency to move from its higher concentration, where the region of its higher concentration, from there it will move to the region of its lower concentration. So the carbon dioxide where it is more in concentration, that is inside the cell, from there the carbon dioxide will move towards outside, that is to the blood capillaries, and mixes with the blood, carried to the lungs for exhalation process. So the carbon dioxide which is formed after respiration as cellular waste, that will be concentrated inside the cell. So the carbon dioxide will have a tendency to move from its region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration, that is to outside, and that will be carried back. Similarly, the oxygen will be more in the blood, and the cells need oxygen for respiration. So what happens? The concentration of oxygen will be more outside the cell when compared with the inside of the cell. So the oxygen will have a tendency to move inward for respiration process. So the oxygen, it will move from its region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. So that is happening by the process of diffusion. Diffusion is the process helps in the exchange of gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen through the plasma membrane. So diffusion happens through the plasma membrane, helps in the transport or movement of gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen. We studied one method through which the movement of substances take place through the plasma membrane is diffusion. We studied the definition of diffusion. Now it's about the second method, that is osmosis. Osmosis is actually the movement of water molecules. Water moves through the plasma membrane by the process of osmosis. And osmosis means it's a movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration. It's like diffusion itself, but it's movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. But remember this, it should be through a selectively permeable membrane. Then only we can call it as osmosis. The water molecules water can move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Even in case of a river, when we take, it moves from the region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. But we call it as osmosis only if it is through a semi-permeable membrane or a selectively permeable membrane. Only if it is through a semi-permeable or a selectively permeable membrane, we can call it as osmosis. And usually the water molecules move in and out of the cell through the plasma membrane by the process of osmosis. So osmosis is actually the movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration through a selectively permeable membrane. We can then call it as osmosis. Now we have to see the different types of movement of water which take place in three different conditions, like highly concentrated solution if the cell is in a highly concentrated surrounding, or a less concentrated surrounding, or a normal medium. So we have to see all that things in detail now. We will see the cells. How does the movement of water molecules will take place through the plasma membrane in cells in different solutions. So before starting with that, I think you would have studied about solutions in chemistry. What do you mean by solution? Solution is actually solvent plus solute. Usually the solvent will be water in most of the cases. Solute can be any salts or any sugars. It can be the solute. Anything that which can be dissolved in a solvent is called as solute. And solute plus solvent, to solute dissolved in solvent forms the solution. So solution is that anyway you know about that. I don't have to teach about solution, right? Now we have to see, you know about concentrated solution, dilute solution, and what dilute solution means. So the amount of solute will be less and the solvent will be more. Such a solution is called as dilute solution. Concentrated solution means the amount of solute will be more in the solvent. So all that things you know. So first case we are going to deal with is cell in a dilute solution. Cell which is kept in a dilute solution. Dilute solution means the amount of water molecules will be more in that solution. So here this is a cell, and this cell is kept inside a dilute solution, very dilute solution, and this dilute solution will be having more water molecules will be more in the dilute solution. You know, cell is having three basic components: plasma membrane, nucleus, and the cytoplasm. And this cytoplasm is actually a solution. Actually, cytoplasm consists of different salts and sugars. It's like a solution itself. It will be having water, and in that the salts and sugars will be dissolved. So when we consider the concentration of the cytoplasm or cell with the outside solution, we can see the water molecules will be more in a dilute solution. So here the water molecules will have when we studied about osmosis, we studied the water molecules will have a tendency to move from its region of higher concentration to a region of its lower concentration. So here in this case, the water molecules will be more outside. Since this is the dilute solution, the water molecules will be more outside. So the water molecules will have a tendency to move both the direction it can move, but more water molecules will move inside the cell, or water molecules will enter the cell. Then what happens to the cell? When water molecules start entering the cell, what happens to the cell? The cell will swells up. So if the cell is kept in a very dilute solution, the water molecules will be more outside, and the water molecules will have a tendency to move inside the cell. So that what happens to the cell? The cell will swells up. And this type of solution, which is very dilute, where the osmosis take place inside, is called as hypotonic solution. Such a type of solution we call it as hypertonic solution. So hypertonic solution is a solution which is very dilute when compared to the cell or the contents of the cell. So here what happens, the water will have a tendency to move from outside to here inside by the process of osmosis. So here the osmosis take place towards inside. Such type of osmosis we call it as endosmosis, which where the water moves inside the cell, we call it as endosmosis. So endosmosis is the process by which the water molecules will move from region of higher concentration to inside the cell. Okay, and that is called as endosmosis. And such a type of solution which is very dilute, we call it as hypotonic solution. So when the cell is kept in a hypertonic solution, you may get the questions like what happened to a cell, plant cell or an animal cell, which is placed in a hypertonic solution. So what we have to write? Hypertonic solution is a very dilute solution. So here the water molecule, concentration of water molecules will be more outside when compared to the cell. So the water will have a tendency to move inside the cell. So when the water molecule enters the cell, what happens to the cell? The cell will swells up. This is what you have to write. You may get 3 more questions regarding this. What may happen to a cell which is kept in a hypotonic solution. Now we have to study the second case. Now the second case is a case in which cell in a solution with the same water concentration as the cytoplasm. Here the cell is kept in a solution where the water concentration inside the cell and outside the cell is same. Water molecule, the concentration of the water molecule is same both inside and outside the cell. So in that case what happens? We studied osmosis, means the movement of water molecules from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, but here both this inside and outside the water concentration is same. So the water will move both inside and outside, can move inside and outside, and the amount of water which moves in and water goes out will be same. The amount of water going out and coming in will be same. The water crosses the plasma membrane in both the direction. The water crosses the plasma membrane in both the direction, and the amount of water going out and coming in will be same always. And the cell, so what happens? The amount of water coming in and going out will be same. So in such case what happens is the cell will remain the same size. The cell will stay in the same size. The cell will be staying in the same size. So nothing will happen to the size of the cell. Here the cell will remain in the same size. So if it is a solution which is having same water concentration as the cytoplasm of the cell, the water will move in and out. The amount of water moving in and out will be same, so that nothing will happen to the cell. Such type of solution which is having same concentration as the cytoplasm of cell, such a solution we call it as isotonic solution. Such a solution we call it as isotonic solution. Here the concentration of water molecules will be same as the concentration of water molecules in the cytoplasm of the cell. So such a solution we call it as isotonic solution. So what will happen to a cell which is kept in an isotonic solution? Nothing will happen. The water will move in and out through the plasma membrane, and the amount of water will be same, and then what happens? The amount of water will be same, moving in and out will be same, so that the size of the cell will remain the same. Nothing will happen to the size of the cell. That is what isotonic solution. Now the third situation is the cell in a concentrated solution. So if the cell is kept in a concentrated solution means there the amount of solute will be more when compared with the solvent, that is water. The concentration of solute will be more. So in such a solution, the water molecules will be less when compared to the cytoplasm. The water molecules will be less. So what happens here? More water crosses in both the direction. Water crosses the cell in both the direction, but more water leaves the cell. In this case, more water molecules will leave the cell. Since the water concentration is more inside, water will have a tendency to move from inside to outside. Here the water molecules will move from inside to outside. So more water will leave the cell. And then what happens to the cell when cell loses the water? When cell loses the water, the cell will shrink. The cell will shrink. And such type of osmosis where water moves from inside to outside, such an osmosis we call it as exosmosis. Exosmosis is the osmosis in which the water molecules move from inside the cell to outside. That is called as exosmosis. And now this type of solution where the concentration is more when compared to the cytoplasm of the cell, such a solution we call it as hypertonic solution. Hypertonic solution. So it is a solution. Hypertonic solution is a concentrated solution when compared to the cytoplasm of the cell. So when a cell is placed in a hypertonic solution, what happens to the cell? The water molecules will move in and out of the cell, but more water leaves the cell. So that what happens? The cell will shrink. Cell will shrink. Exosmosis will take place and the cell will shrink. So if a question asks like what happens to a cell which is kept in a hypertonic solution, what happens? The cell, water will move in and out, more water leaves the cell, leads to exosmosis, and then the cell will shrink. This is what happens in the case of a hypertonic solution. So we studied about three different types of solution. One is hypertonic solution, isotonic solution, and hypertonic solution. Hypertonic solution means a solution with more water molecules, and isotonic, the same concentration of water molecules is same both inside and outside the cell, and hypertonic, concentrated solution. So these are the three different types of solutions. So when we place a cell, these are the three different situations that happens when cell is in a three different environments. Three different environments, what happens to the cell. For example, I can tell one example for you to just understand the concept. Think about hypotonic solution. We studied in a hypotonic solution, when we keep the cell, the water will enters the cell and the cell will swells up. Hypotonic means water concentration will be more outside, so the water will have a tendency to move inside the cell and the cell swells up. Example for that is, have you seen the raisins which is put in the water? Raisins means the dried grapes thing which you use for making like pies and all. So that raisins, if we put in the water, what happens? Raisins, if we put raisins in water, we can see the raisins will swells up. That's actually what is happening there. Endosmosis is happening there. Now example for hypertonic solution, think about the pickle, like tender mango pickle. Tender mangoes, if we put in a salt solution, what happens to the tender mango? It shrinks, right? It shrinks. That's an example for hypertonic solution. Hypertonic means concentrated solution. So if we put the tender mangoes in concentrated salt solution, what happens to that mango? The mango will lose the water by exosmosis and the mango will shrink. That is an example for this situation. Exosmosis. Example for exosmosis. So this is about the three different types of solutions: hypotonic, isotonic, and hypertonic. That you will be getting chance to use these situations in higher grades when you study about different movement of water and all. So that time we'll be studying about all these things in detail. Now we have to study the significance of plasma membrane in different organisms. The role of plasma membrane in different organisms we will be studying now. Plasma membrane. So now we will go through certain facts about plasma membrane. Plasma membrane, the outermost covering of the cell that separates the content of cell from its external environment. It allows the entry and exit of some materials in and out of the cell, that we saw when we studied the functions of plasma membrane. It prevents the movement of some materials and hence they are called as selectively permeable membrane. And the main constituent of plasma membrane, it is very important, the plasma membrane constituent. It's actually the main constituents of plasma membrane are proteins and lipids. We can see the structure of plasma membrane. We can see the integral proteins and the lipid layers, bilayer, two layers of lipids, and in between the protein structure can be seen. Now we can see the significance of plasma membrane. When we deal with the significance of plasma membrane, we have to think about the two terms osmosis and diffusion again. In case of unicellular freshwater organisms and most plant cells, they tend to gain water through osmosis. They tend to gain water through the process of osmosis. Now, absorption of water by plant roots also by the process of osmosis itself. The absorption of water by the plant roots. The roots absorb water from the soil by the process of osmosis. That is actually a basic phenomenon is diffusion. And diffusion helps in the exchange of gases in plants. The cell obtain nutrition from its environment by the process of diffusion. So these are all significance of plasma membrane. It happens through the plasma membrane. Then the plasma membrane is flexible, and the flexible, that is, it can change the shape. The flexibility enables the cell to engulf in food and other materials from its external environment. I think you would have studied about the nutrition in amoeba. In case of amoeba, they can extend their plasma membrane to engulf the food material from the external environment and capture the food. And this process is known as endocytosis. Amoeba acquires its food through endocytosis. The next important part of a cell is cell wall. Once when we finish with the plasma membrane, now we have to study the cell wall. Cell wall is the specialty of plant cells. It can be seen in the plant cells. Animal cells, they don't have cell wall. In plant cells, in addition to plasma membrane, another rigid outer covering called cell wall is present, and the cell wall is made up of cellulose. Plasmolysis is another important phenomenon. We have to study plasmolysis now. In hypertonic solution, plant cell loses water through osmosis. If we keep a plant cell in a hypertonic solution, what happens? The plant cell loses the water. Hypertonic solution means the water will move out of the cell. And what happens? This leads to the shrinkage or contraction of the contents of cell away from the cell wall. Cell wall will remain intact and the contents of cell will shrink towards the center. And this phenomenon, cell wall will remain there, but plasma membrane along with the contents will shrink. This phenomenon is known as plasmolysis. Now we see the functions of cell wall. Cell wall provide protection to the plant cell. They provide structural strength to the plant cell, and cell wall permits the cell of plants, fungi and bacteria to withstand very dilute external media without bursting. What happens if the external media is dilute? The water molecules will have a tendency to enter the cells. So once the water enters the cell will swells up. But because of the presence of cell wall, the cell will not get burst. So these are the main functions of cell wall. One function is protection, then structural strength, and helps the cell to withstand the dilute external media without bursting. So today we studied about the cell, the fundamental unit of life, and also we studied about the basic components of cell, discovery of cell, all these things. And in basic components of cell, we studied about plasma membrane, the functions of plasma membrane and the significance of plasma membrane. And also we studied about the cell wall, that is specialty of plant cell, and the functions and the constituent of cell wall also we studied today. So by this we are concluding today's topic. Tomorrow we will be studying the other two basic components of cell, that is nucleus and the cytoplasm. Thank you.